Thank you so much can everyone hear me okay? I'm always terrible with mics. Okay, perfect. I'd like to begin this session by acknowledging that we're gathered on Tiohtià:ke, known today as Montreal, on the unceded and traditional lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, who are the caretakers of these lands and waters. Tiohtià:ke has long been a gathering place for many First Peoples, including the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabeg, and Huron-Wendat. Their relationships with this land continue to this day, shaping this history and its future. And this acknowledgement is an understanding that the ongoing and deep-seated impacts of colonization, and it's a recognition that it's not just history, but a living legacy that continues to affect Indigenous communities across the country. And so when we talk about the right to housing, we're also talking about a right that's intrinsically linked to dignity and community, and cannot be separated from the rights of Indigenous people who have lived on and cared for these lands. I invite you to reflect on your relationship to this land, what responsibilities it calls to you, and how that connection can guide our shared work and towards justice and repair. My name is Misha Khan. I work at the National Right to Housing Network, and we have the privilege of hosting the Right to Housing stream at the National Conference. I'll be moderating today's session. It will be in English today, and so if you're using your simultaneous interpretation, it's just going to be on channel 3. And so I'd love to start by introducing our presenters today, Urtza Hussain, and Susan Davis. So I'll first call Urtza Hussain to the floor to start us off.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Right? Hello. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Urtza, and I'll be presenting about a case study of Parc-Extension neighborhood here in Montreal. I'll be talking about the discrimination in housing markets, specifically focusing on the language aspects of it, among other. So here are some of the objectives of this presentation. It will focus on the complexity of the housing system, the role that the language plays in the housing context, as well as the community support system that exists. And how does the allophone tenant, those who do not speak, French or English, go through this whole process in the private rental market? So here I have a small audio for you. Should be.
यहाँ पे हाउस रेंट ढूंढने में बहुत प्रॉब्लम हुई थी, क्योंकि यहाँ पे वो क्रेडिट हिस्ट्री मांगते हैं। दूसरा कहते हैं अगर आप पीआर हो, क्योंकि हमने रेफ्यूजी केस लगाया था, इस वजह से ये हमें मुश्किलात हुई यहाँ पे।
Is it difficult to understand, right? So this is what we're talking about now. Imagine yourself trying to navigate a housing system in a new country without knowing the language. You receive a notice from your landlord saying that you can no longer stay in your apartment. You reach out to your housing authority for support, for help, and they don't understand you. What would you do? So here what we are trying to do is to bring language into conversation about housing justice and to highlight the impact of its inaccessibility has on tenants who are already facing other barriers. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention that this was co-authored with Dr. Leila Ghaffari, who couldn't be here today. Sorry for that. Okay, so I'm a researcher, so here's a small literature review about housing and immigrant. So there's there's a lot of literature that exists that highlights the housing journey for immigrant, refugees, and asylum seekers. That that highlights the complexity that immigrant tenants face, that ranges from weak financial resources, language barriers, unfamiliarity with the local market, which limit their access to the adequate housing. We also know about the discrimination that that's written a lot, known a lot, that the discrimination that exists within this system that further complicate this whole housing process. In all of that, the public housing, the social housing, which is not really considered, is an option for a lot of immigrant tenants. So they have to go through the final the private market, even if they have been living here for several years with their immigration process going on for 5 to 6 years, and even more sometimes. And also, the research has also shown that the neighborhood with the immigrant and racialized population has been, have higher rates of eviction than the others. In terms of language accessibility, we know little in Canada, but from US and European context, we know how it impacts the housing journey for immigrants. That ranges from communication problem with the housing authority, the housing providers, or the landlords, and it also complicates for tenants to understand their rights or their obligation, which often translates into unintended violation of the lease agreement. But in Quebec, where there's Quebec has a comparatively strong tenant protection framework in Canada, and a linguistic framework that's distinct with conversation about French and English. We wanted to focus on how we can, how the allophone tenants go through this whole process in this framework. So a bit about the Quebec's housing system. So here we have the Tribunal Administratif de Logement, which is the rental board or the housing court that oversees the the residential lease, that provides the information, resolve conflict between tenants and the landlord. It has structure like a court system, which there's often an administrative judge, and sometimes the lawyers are involved more often, and it has also have the formal process. In order to to get a file open, you have to follow a specific procedure, a specific time frame in order to get this to open a case and to go to the hearing and present yourself. It requires knowledge of the housing law, or the frame, to be able to represent yourself in front of the administrative judge, which has been known to also been complicated even for those who can who are proficient in either languages. So about the Quebec's tenant protection framework, there are two main important points. There is a right to maintain occupancy, which means that the tenant can stay in their apartment, as long as they want. With the lease renews every year, but there are exception to those that right to maintain occupancy, which is the eviction or repossession. Eviction means for the eviction, most common causes are when the tenant breaks the lease agreement. For example, like non-payment of rent is the most common one at the tribunal that can lead to eviction. In terms of non-payment of rent at the tribunal, that has a really straightforward process. If someone tenant and the landlord, they will go to the court, and the judge would only see, if they have paid or not paid, if they have proof or not, and that's it. Other than that, the tenant cannot argue about, their housing condition, or, the reason why they were not able to pay the rent for that month. That's not taken into account. It's just a straightforward process, which, you go to a court, and that's, it's already, decided beforehand, how it's going to go. And another way to, the eviction is the repossession, which is also, which without any fault, that can lead to eviction, which means that when the landlord or property owner want to give the rental unit to their family member, they can ask for repossession, showing, good faith that their family member will live there. And, and if they, get that repossession and the tenant get evicted, after that, there is no way to ensure that the apartment is repossessed. the apartment goes to if the apartment went to the family of the landlord. There is one case that I know about that, one tenant who found out that after having their, the apartment repossessed, they found out that it was later put onto the private market for higher rent, but they tried to challenge it. That was last October-ish, and they got their first hearing in earlier, this year around March, which was delayed, and that's, and they got the new date in this October, which is a year of a delay for this kind of procedures, which is, sometimes, when tenants are trying to get their rights, they have to wait much more longer than those that, favors the property owner or the landlord. And the second point that about the Quebec's housing system is the rent increase once per year, which means that there's, the tribunal introduces, calculated percentage rent increase every year that, that should be, the maximum allowed, but it's often, used as a minimum. And it's also up to the, tenants to be able to contest that, which means that, someone can, increase the rent much more higher than that. And if the tenant does not know about their rights or, how to, properly refuse the rent, the deadline passes, they'll have to pay that, the rent increase, even though that's double or triple the amount that should be allowed. In terms of linguistic framework, as you all know, in Quebec, it has a distinct linguistic framework where there is a focus on preserving, French as a minority language in North America, and it's also connected to the province's history and its, culture. And to preserve it means that there are, bills and the laws that try to preserve it. One of them is mentioned here, that's Bill 96, which is a law now. The main point that there is that it limits the access for new immigrants up to 6 months, that they can only receive services in any other language only during the first 6 month period. After that, they cannot receive in any other language, only in French. But even during this 6 month period, is the any other language only mean English. So under this policy, Tribunal also, does not have any framework to provide services to the allophone tenants, those who do not speak language or newcomers, about their, housing rights or obligation. It does not, nor does, during the hearing process, it does not have the framework to be able to accommodate the needs of tenants who do not speak these languages, which raises a critical question about, how can, those tenants defend their rights within this, the housing system when, the system does not allow for equal access to get the justice to, to protect their housing situation. So in order to understand that, we focused on the case study of Parc-Extension neighborhood, which is one of the most low-income and multicultural neighborhood in Montreal. And the neighborhood itself has been, also going through the process of gentrification with the University of Montreal's campus opening up at its border. It has been, and with the housing crisis, it has, been going through this the rapid rent increase, which is, threatening the community itself. The neighborhood has been, a long history of accommodating newcomers and immigrants from, Italy, Greek, South Asia, and Africa. And, to put it into perspective, currently the tenant that who have been living in the neighborhood for 5 or 6 years, they are paying around $700 and $800 per month. But if they try to look, if they get evicted or, they move out, they have to pay triple that amount to be able to afford to live in that area. So In order to understand this, we focused on the narrative approach. We gathered the lived experience of allophone tenants who had gone through this, the trouble with their housing, to this whole tribunal process, and we also interviewed the all the actors that are involved in that process, which were, the community worker, the property owner, the legal workers, and the lawyers, and all of these, the interviews with the allophone tenants were conducted in the languages that they, understand. So we were able to get the, get to the detail of, their experience that they went through. So in order to fully understand the perspective of those who faced it, let me share one story with you. I came to Canada as a refugee claimant without knowledge of French or English. Searching for apartment was a nightmare. Everywhere I went, people asked for citizenship proof, credit history, or a guarantor, or a job. But how could I find one when I was new and I did not even speak the language? In the end, I had to take whatever I could get. The apartment that I got was unhygienic. There was maintenance issues, and I never received the proper lease agreement. When I complained about these issues to my landlord, he told me that since I did not have any lease agreement, I did not have any rights to ask for any repairs. Not knowing my right at first, I accepted it. Everything was quiet for a while. Then one day, he showed up at my apartment with a document in English. He explained that I had to leave the apartment for 1 month while he made the necessary repairs. At first, I hesitated to sign, but he kept insisting, his voice growing angrier. I felt pressured and signed it. Soon after, he asked me to move out, but I declined. A court case was opened against me. Has been opened against me, saying that the paper that I had signed was actually agreeing to move out. I'm saying that I'll move out. At first, I tried to resist, but my landlord's attitude turned hostile, and the harassment started. I went through this whole exhausting process of going through, the community group, through the translator, and to get ready for the hearing. I went through this whole exhausting process, preparing for, the hearing, not knowing exactly what I had signed. Maybe I had signed away my own rights to live in my apartment. 1,000 questions ran through my head. What if it affected my family? I was already under so much work. What if it impacted my immigration proceeding? Going through the court system would only add further more stress. Even if I won, his behavior would only get worse. And so what's the point of it? So the day before the hearing, I gave up and sent a letter to my landlord agreeing to move out. So this is a story that's made up of many stories, which sort of gives us a picture of the complexity of the housing system and how the tenants how the tenants navigated the barrier that they face, the process that they go through, and that the process itself is really discouraging and uncertain. And we also know that the language itself has is among other factors intersecting with the the housing, but it's not discussed as much in debate about housing or need of accessible system for those tenants who do not understand it. So from all these stories, we analyzed some patterns. There were, some common themes that emerged at first. First, the allophone tenant entered the housing system already disadvantaged. The private market is already filled with, many discrimination, many demands. That in order to be able to, get a housing, you have to, have a certain number of credit history or a job at least to be able to get the apartment, and then not being able to speak French or English. It also means inaccessibility on the platforms, online platforms, as well as the communication issues with the landlord, or unintended violation, or not being able to hold their landlord accountable. So a lot of times that the newcomer tenants, they would rely on the informal networks to find housing, or to get immediate housing in the private market. This is one of the image from a board in the community building, religious building kind of situation in the Parc-Ex that has around 17 listings. All of these are rooms. This is sort of a way for tenants to get immediate housing, but it's also has been used as a way to in this situation where tenants sublease as a subtenant lives in apartment, they do not get their proper lease agreement or anything, so they have to if they ask for any demands, or the better housing condition, or if they're facing any issues in their housing, and they ask the person who is in charge of the unit, the person who has the lease on their name, and which is which we call the leaseholder, and that's the common response was to that. Since they do not have proper lease agreement, their name is not on the lease, they cannot ask for these kind of better housing condition, and if they are not happy with living there, they can move out of the room kind of situation, room sharing kind of situation. I already said that point. Then instead of putting in a system that protect tenants from going through this whole exploitative process, the tribunal, with its the complexity and the inaccessibility, it created a framework that tenants are more disadvantaged and more reluctant on to get services from the housing code. Okay. In all of this situation, the community support system that exists, which is the very central to this whole process of tenants going through the housing justice system. That's a photo of the posters, I believe, of eviction, and it's 8 different languages in Parc-Extension neighborhood. That's the committee that's the Parc-Extension. That's the neighborhood committee that serves the geographical area of Parc-Extension to provide tenants immediate service about to inform them about their right, or to prepare them about their housing. So in terms of if the tenant want to know about their rights, or to go through this whole process to get their rights, or to get justice about their housing situation, they would be the first to contact the housing committees, and then the housing committees are at this housing committee in particular, it's at the center of all these communication for the tenants, between the legal aid, between the lawyer, between the tribunal, between the tenant himself and the interpreter, if there is any involved. And with this, the housing crisis, as well as the gentrification that's pushing toward evicting tenants out of their homes, it also is impacting this whole process, because these kind of organization, they are only servicing the small area. So if someone get evicted, they moved out to the far end of the island of Montreal, or to the suburbs. They won't be able to get this kind of this support system. And That's one point. And even with this, the support from the community groups, if the tenant go to the, with the support of community group, they go to the tribunal to, for the court hearing, they're still not being able to, access it properly because there is no framework, there's no proper framework for translating or interpreting during the hearing. The process is, the judges have little time, so they do not, allow for a long time for the interpretation. So the only thing that, if any question is asked from tenant, that would be translated, and anything else that's, and the tenant's response, that would be translated. Other than that, nothing would be translated. That will be unknown to tenants throughout this whole process. So, even if tenants find out, about their rights, take the time to, get an interpreter, and, they can, any interpreter that they can trust to share their, the problem of housing, their experience of the hearing at the tribunal to get justice is still fragmented and lost in the translation. So from all the interviews, here's the small word that we made that sort of highlight how people see the rental board or this whole process. That's hopeless, overwhelm, exhaustion, frustration, and that's this image that highlights this complexity. That with this image, a lot of tenants are do not, because of this image of the rental board, that a lot of tenants do not go to the rental board for help during their problem related to eviction or non-payment or maintenance or better housing condition. Because all the tenants that were interviewed, all of them had been going through this have been going through the tribunal process for several years. Some had consecutive hearings, one after another, to be able to defend their housing, but all of them were eviction cases. Like they were all initiated by the landlords. All of the tenants that were interviewed had issues with their apartment related to maintenance, but only one of them had been had actually opened the case against the file against their landlord to get the better housing condition. In general, the feeling was the same, that if they go through this whole process, it would only, add further stress to their situation. First, they do not understand this whole process that's, coming. And the second that they, after the hearing, if they won, even if they won, there would be no, protection from their landlords, which, sometimes, plays like the harassment or this kind of behavior toward the landlord, toward the tenants, if they, won any case or try to get their rights. So just to conclude, the language barriers that are often, treated as an afterthought, they are very central to this, housing precarity in Quebec. With this linguistic framework, dominated by the conversation about French and English, it continues to exclude the realities and the needs of allophone tenants from the housing debate. Also, it's sort of, in the current political landscape, the mainstreaming of this idea that immigrants and the newcomers and asylum seekers are responsible for the housing crisis. It also undermines the reality of the situation, that these tenants are also one of the biggest group that's facing this problem, who are one of the group that's poorly housed, and further this going in that direction would only add further marginalization toward them. At the tribunal, the institutional monolingualism, which does not just make communication difficult, it actually bars out the tenants from actually getting the their rights, to defend their rights, and it's also created operates as a mechanism that's, support this whole housing inequalities and, reinforces this mechanism of exploitation and displacement. It further, supports the already existing power imbalance that, exists between tenants and the landlords. And it's further, pushes toward that direction ultimately. These, the language barriers, which is often seen as individual issue for the issues for the, the immigrants or, the person who do not speak. It's not, it's structural issues, which, structural issue rooted in how our, these institutions here are designed and who they are, disposed to, they are built to serve. If they want someone to understand this, their rights or housing, the process, you need to make sure that they understand. One example is at the, the conference, everyone's wearing the headphones for the translation. So if you want someone to understand, you make sure that they understand. Okay. Thank you so much. That's it.
Hello, everybody. I don't know if I see it here. Do you want to come and pull it up for me? There we go. Perfect. All right. Took a couple of days to get to this moment and a lot of uncomfortable questions for people in other sessions, but here we are now. My name is Susan Davis. I am a sex worker. I would like to tell you, of course, first of all, that we are so grateful to be here in the, and I don't want to say it badly, Ganyen Kehaka Nation, unceded territories. I'm visiting here from the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. So grateful to be a guest in these lands. Here we go. Did it do it? Oh, there we go. All right, so I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself first before we get going so you can understand my experience and what brings me to this moment to represent my community today. I'm 57 years old. I'm from Halifax. I finished high school in 1986 and completed the Royal Conservatory of Music. I was a lifeguard, did all the things that everybody does. My parents are scientists. I had a great childhood. I was not abused or anything like that. I did not attend university. I have worked in many jobs: chambermaid, piano teacher, hot dog cart operator, exhibition ride operator, roofing, landscaping, you name it. In 1986, I became an escort. I did outcalls to hotels and to clients' homes, and I had a madame who arranged my clients for me. Since then, I've actively worked in the sex industry as an independent escort with experience in many areas of the industry, as many sex workers do. I migrated across the industry and this country with the availability of work. I worked in micro brothels, businesses run from residential spaces, adult film, massage parlors, on the street in Halifax, Moncton, Montreal, Toronto, Surrey, New Westminster, Burnaby, Vancouver, all the way across. So I spent time in prison. I survived numerous assaults, several attempts on my life. I battled cocaine and heroin addiction and survived 4 overdoses. I migrated to Vancouver in 1990 after being released from prison. The fisheries had crashed and many people left Nova Scotia and the Maritimes generally at that time, moving out west looking for a better life. We had everything we owned on our back. I remember my friend's father dropping us off on the number 1 highway and saying, "See you at dinner," figuring we weren't going to go anywhere, but we didn't. And I've been in Vancouver ever since. We came into all kinds of peril on that journey. Pimps, violence, drugs. We lived in hotels that we paid for every night from our sex work. Of course, periodically the police would come through and sweep us all out of there, throwing us out. I experienced homelessness periodically during that time. It was also when all the women started to go missing from the downtown east side in Vancouver. Indeed, 3 different serial killers preyed on our community during that time. I myself had a violent encounter with one of those animals and gave testimony about my experiences to the Missing Women's Commission of Inquiry. In 2002, I had an opportunity to join a group of sex workers in the formation of the BC Coalition of Experiential Communities, of which I am the executive director till this day. The BC Coalition of Experiential Communities are a democratic organization of sex workers who are activists and are diverse in race, gender, genre, and sex work, and work across the BC Yukon region. Our work focuses on law and policy reform being based on evidence and fact, and placing the voices of sex workers at the center of any work that could impact our lives and safety. As part of the BC Coalition, I work to improve the conditions which are impacting sex workers' lives and safety. I work to establish organizations, fix gaps in victim services, fight violence against our community, develop cooperative business models, establish occupational health and safety information to ensure sex workers had the tools to make safe decisions about their work, and work to change policies with the police and the City of Vancouver that were impacting our lives. I am a... Yeah. Thanks, man. I am a published health researcher and an expert in methods for engaging with the sex working community. We created community research guidelines to help to protect our community from biased research and those people trying to use bias findings to further criminalize or marginalize our community. We learned these principles, which now form the foundation of the Gender-Based Analysis Plus program, which is mandated across the entirety of the federal government, from the people who were the authors of the Tri-Council Policy Statement, Dr. Lohman and Dr. Palais, who shared so much of their knowledge and experience with us and really shaped the way that I became an activist. This approach has been the foundation of our work in the Coalition since our inception. The terms of reference of the Coalition were developed by sex workers for sex workers. Every report we've written, every action we have taken have been under the direction of our community and center sex workers' experiences. Funding, of course, to address these issues is few and far between, especially if you're a sex workers organization with nobody managing you, you know. We're always last in line and first to get cut. We have been struggling to bring the voices of people who do sex work to the table throughout our history. Mostly funding sources don't prioritize sex workers and view us as being bad for their brand, and that if they're associated with sex workers at all, we may diminish their cause or something like that. Even the Ending Homelessness movement is reluctant to align themselves with us. That's how deep the stigma runs. So, for background, I'll first start by just saying that I got a complaint during the pandemic lockdown about a woman living in city-funded housing in Vancouver. And the complaint was that her property manager had made her sign one of these good neighbor agreements that prohibits prostitution. And this woman, the property manager, would stand outside her door and wait until she thought she could hear her having sex inside, and then let herself into the apartment to catch her in the act, after which humiliation and talking to would ensue. I mean, Jesus Christ, this can't possibly be legal, so of course I was incensed, and that's where all of the things that followed came from. We should also say, and this is what this background is about, I guess, is the Population Project, which is something that I've recently discovered. The researcher downloaded 3.5 million ads from the internet in Canada and counted individual sex workers. This was publicly available data. I have since seized control of the data, so the data is safe and is in my control and being protected, just so that it can't be used in any way anybody wants to. But the revelations from that information was incredible. Now, in any given month, there are 26,000 people working in sex work in Canada. And when that study expanded to 2 years, that number became 169,000 people. Another part of that data is that the average length of time in the industry is about 5 months. And so if you start extrapolating, things start to get really, 1.35 million people over 10 years with lived experience. That's not to say that there are 1.5 million sex workers in Canada, but there are 1.5 million people who've had some experience with sex work in Canada. So this obviously gives us a little bit more panic. Jesus, what the hell? We need to get moving on all of these things. This does not include on-street sex workers or exotic dancers or adult content creators, and only includes specifically sex workers who ran an ad for full contact sex work on the internet. In 2014, sex work was said to have been decriminalized under the current criminal code governing sex work in Canada. And in spite of assertions of protecting people promoted during the development of the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Acts, the federal, provincial, and municipal governments and other public agencies continue to discriminate against sex workers, promoting our exclusion from society generally, and in particular, in this case, as it relates to housing. Proponents of PACIPA, as we call it, asserted that the legal framework would solve all the issues being raised by the sex worker community and ensure that what was believed to be a small number of elite adult consensual sex workers could enjoy all the rights and freedoms that other citizens and working class people do. We know now that that assumption is incorrect, that this is not a small number of people, and that a minimum 170,000 sex workers in Canada do not enjoy equal status as citizens. The social exclusion of sex workers in Canada is entrenched in every corner of public policy. The work to unravel these biased policies will take decades. The layers of legislation, policy, and practice discovered during this work presented us with a serious challenge. Remaining focused on housing exclusion was difficult as more and more issues were uncovered. Some of these issues included the Child Protection Acts, family court bias, municipal bylaws and zoning, municipal safety plans, accepted harmful definitions of prostitution, and accepted harmful stereotypes of how sex workers live. The stigma surrounding sex work affects many aspects of our lives, but housing is one area where sex workers often experience bias and discrimination, and as long as I can remember, this has been an issue for our community. While sex workers are not named as a protected group under the Charter of Rights in Canada, housing is one area where our rights are protected. This is not widely known, however, and as such, our community have had to contend with issues related to housing forever. The BC Human Rights Tribunal Housing Rights section states that it's illegal to discriminate against a legal source of income. This provision was intended to protect British Columbians whose sole source of income was disability or social support payments from discrimination when they were seeking housing. Since the passing of PACIPA, however, sex work has been purported to be decriminalized. This, of course, is a source of friction in communities, as sex work is really not decriminalized, but this is another discussion. As the Government of Canada has stated sex work is decriminalized, this provision protecting people from discrimination against a legal source of income is the foundation of our work. And we are working on this issue based on that assertion. The housing crisis being faced across Canada has exacerbated this situation for sex workers and compounded the problems experienced by members of our community trying to secure and maintain their housing. The bias experienced by sex workers trying to find housing is not limited to full contact sex workers, but also to exotic dancers, adult content creators, adult film actors, massage providers, independent workers, and everyone in between, regardless of their location in the industry. Should be noted that many organizations and researchers and others have tried to work on this before. The Aisha Project tried to work on this specifically. The Wish Drop-In Center established the first sex workers specific housing, and Newfoundland Shop are also working hard to address these issues. The Global Network of Sex Workers, of which the coalition is a member, all of these groups are trying their best to work on these things and try to work on to make a difference. So many people have worked on these issues, but nothing really has changed in terms of the stigma and exclusion faced by sex workers seeking housing. So, on to this project. We received some financial support from the Social Policy and Research Council of British Columbia and the City of Vancouver to conduct a series of exploratory fact-finding activities regarding the impacts of housing exclusion on sex workers, in particular those who are homeless and whose housing is precarious. The BC Coalition centers the voices of our community in all the work we do. This ensures our compliance with the Tri-Council policy statement. This project was no different. We also conducted a law, policy, and practice review, along with a series of community consultations to gather sex workers' experiences with housing exclusion. Knowing the source of these discriminatory practices can lead to policy change for the better. The sex worker community consultation worked to capture our community's experiences with housing exclusion and discrimination, and then together these two documents can provide the foundation for change. So the sex worker engagement, the consultations were undertaken in various locations around the province and the country. Participants from Surrey, Vancouver, Victoria, Courtenay, Whitehorse, Edmonton, Calgary, rural Alberta, Saskatchewan, Hamilton, Guelph, Toronto, and Halifax all took part. Sex workers from multiple locations within the industry, and of course a broad cross-section of cultural, racial, and gender diversity were also represented among the 52 sex workers who took part. Sex workers consulted during this project were all over the age of 25, with the majority being between 35 and 55 years old. The BC Coalition worked to be as inclusive as possible, and that's reflected in the diversity of people who took part. Also, what was interesting was that the majority of sex workers self-identifying as having a disability. This finding is similar to other recent research involving sex workers known as By Us, For Us, in which 73% of sex workers identified as having a disability. In our project, it was 74%. So, sex workers who took part were a majority renters or living in supportive housing which had tenancy agreements attached to it. So we'll move on just to the sex worker engagement. We asked a series of questions to try to spark a conversation. These questions were designed collectively by sex worker consultants who also conducted the interviews and facilitated the engagements. So For Us and By Us all the way through the entire thing. So this was question number 1. And of course, we all know what these findings are going to be, but sex workers described overt discrimination targeting harassment and violence at the hands of neighbors, landlords, intimate partners, shelter staff, and police in relation to their housing. Sex working parents reported discrimination based on having children. In particular, Indigenous parents felt discriminated against, naming Indigenous racism. Housing instability for sex working parents was also named as a serious concern related to child custody. Racism more generally was also named as a significant barrier to finding housing in a race-based stereotypes that were overt, especially as it relates to criminality. Reports of sexual assault, sexual harassment, reports of illegal entry into apartments, access to a sex worker's personal references, personal information, and knowing where they lived before gives landlords and property managers power over our community. Neighbors were reported to enact violence in multiple ways, including harassment via police report, hate crimes, name-calling and outing people, and sexual assault. Violence and theft within shelters were also reported. Some shelters and supportive housing staff were reported to be unwilling to hear complaints from sex working tenants. Sex workers reported that their housing was always under threat, and so worked to keep their sex worker status a secret. They felt physically threatened, disrespected by landlords and housing operators, and faced challenges with current and former intimate partners. Ex-partners were reported to use sex worker status to control them by threatening to report sex workers to the landlord, housing operator, and to Child and Family Protection. One participant described being human trafficked by people for access to housing. Housing stability was an issue for almost all participants, with sex workers reporting having to move often. Reports of financial discrimination based on disability and social assistance were also named, as well as credit checks and criminal record checks, which all violate people's human rights. Transphobia, homophobia were reported, with discrimination being normalized in housing screening processes and violence also being experienced. Beauty bias was also reported, with people feeling their youth or their look was being judged and impacting their ability to secure housing. Have you ever felt any discrimination when you're trying to apply for housing or a mortgage? 100% of participants faced barriers with housing references, work references, and lack of identifiable source of income. Participants agreed that it was better to keep your sex worker status secret. One sex worker wanted to add that they had definitely experienced discrimination as a BIPOC person, and certainly racism was a common theme throughout all of our discussions. Financial exclusion was also featured when sex workers applied for mortgages. Traditional lenders were not willing to work with sex workers, so higher cost loans were the only solution to home ownership. With one extreme case where a third party helped a sex worker to buy a house, she put the down payment. 3 years later, when they had a falling out, the house was in that person's name and they stole the house. So their entire down payment, all the payments they had made for those 3 years, gone in one fell swoop, and they had no rights whatsoever. Have you ever felt uncomfortable because of nosy neighbors? The experiences of violence and threats outlined by sex workers included sexual harassment, sexual assault, extortion, landlord refusal to conduct maintenance, landlord false accusations about sex worker tenant, landlord threats of calling the police when sex worker tenants asked for maintenance, extortion for sex, theft, spitting, and other physical and verbal violence. Many experienced being outed as sex workers by ex-partners and to new love interests, other tenants, family, children's schools, and employers. One sex worker reported being outed by another sex worker to the landlord. Lateral oppression and violence in our community is something that we need to address, and we need to face that as a community. Intimate partner violence and the loss of access and custody of children were also named as outcomes of sex work being stigmatized and housing policies being weaponized against sex workers. Some sex workers shared stories of using human rights mechanisms and other tools, so some sex workers were able to stand up for their rights. No one had experienced the SCAN Act directly, which is the Safer Communities and Neighborhoods Act, but some had been required to sign good neighbor agreements. Sexual harassment, noise, lack of maintenance, no heat, sextortion, no children, no guests, immediate eviction, and leases prohibiting sex work in both market and supportive housing were all identified by sex workers who took part in our consultation. So what can we do to fix these problems? Well, people talked about developing a sex worker-specific cooperative housing model. Stigma was a major discussion amongst all of our participants, and working on ways to try to address that more broadly amongst society and to show that sex workers are part of the community and all around us and actually valuable to the community. Sex workers wished and hoped for equality in housing and society more generally. Sex workers also shared other solutions such as hotels which rent by the hour, licensing landlords, securing more rights for sex workers, a sex workers building with an in-call space on the ground floor, holding bad landlords accountable through a complaints process, and education for sex workers about their rights in housing. Sex workers also reported being resigned to the impact of stigma and using any method they could to hide what they do for work to survive. Continuous advocacy, the fight for decriminalization, and educating society about sex workers' housing rights were all suggested as important in the fight to end sex workers' housing exclusion. We then asked them, is there anything that you would like to add or that we missed? And sex workers expressed how difficult finding safe housing is and how they feel like people are watching them all the time. Sex workers noted that hotels are also watching them, and as you see, hotel chains and others, human trafficking initiative training all their employees because, these people are not bonded, they're not policemen, but they can be trusted with this really intimate knowledge and and to judge sex workers on the hotel floor anyway. So, sex workers identified that stigma against sex workers needs to be addressed across society. Sex workers also suggested a tiny home community, which I see that in some communities they are building tiny homes, and I love seeing all of these things sort of emerging from other things, and I hope that eventually these things will begin to trickle down to sex workers' inclusion as well. So, for the policy and practice review, in response to the complaints from sex workers, the project coordinator, that's me, investigated policy and practice related to the Good Neighbor Agreement in an effort to discover the source of the practice and any other related programs which might impact sex workers' ability to find and secure and maintain stable housing. An internet search of Good Neighbor Agreements immediately came up with the Crime-Free Multi-Housing Program. Close examination of the program and the tools revealed discrimination, which names sex workers specifically. Sex workers are described as criminals, having gang ties, drug users, dangerous, a threat to communities, and as people to be feared. Criminal, illegal, nuisance, dangerous, threatening, unacceptable behavior, keep your home safe, fear, radical, potential criminal charges. Property managers, landlords, and non-sex working tenants are all told by police that sex workers are dangerous criminals who are a threat to communities. Crime-Free Multi-Housing Program has been in use across Canada since 1991 and exists in every corner of this country. The program specifically mentions human rights law and warns landlords and property managers to be careful when denying tenancy to avoid discriminating against somebody. The Crime-Free Lease Addendum, also known as the Good Neighbor Agreement, prohibits sex work outright and provides a loophole for eviction with no notice of tenants who sign the addendum and then are found to have violated the terms. This program has even been adopted by publicly funded housing authorities, including BC Housing. The Property Manager's Toolkit provided by BC Housing to BC Housing Partners includes a copy of the Crime-Free Lease Addendum and encourages managers to take the CFMH training. The SCAN Acts and Community Safety Acts across Canada have now made the processes and tools promoted in CFMH into law. From 2006 to 2015, provinces and territories adopted this legislative approach. The inclusion of sex workers in the law, beside firearms, explosives, criminal organizations, intoxicating substances, makes sex workers seem dangerous and casts us as a threat to communities. This is the same foundation used within the Crime-Free Multi-Housing Program materials. Even in scan units have even been formed in some places, like in Nova Scotia. There's a scan unit number to call and report people, and the web page encourages contacting the police to report as well. In the Yukon, the scan unit members revealed some troubling practices during a conversation with me. He said, "It's amazing what you can learn when you open a door." Scan unit members are using the act to subvert requirements for search warrants and gain visual access to a property based on a complaint. The scan unit members also made mention of potentially contacting Child Protective Services based on an interaction at the door of a subject of a scan complaint. So what does all this mean? It means that sex workers cannot trust the mainstream systems. Those systems don't view us as citizens of value. As long as a law or practice that threatens sex worker safety exists, it has the potential to harm our community. The violence experienced by sex workers as a result of these laws, policies, and tools is unacceptable. It is a stark example of the impact of government inaction, conflict of action, and refusal to do the hard work of recognizing these issues as the cause of the violence. The path forward. Legislative, if sex workers are to end discrimination, housing is an important place to start. The SCAN Acts are provincial, and as such, complaints will have to be launched in every single province and territory to bring them down. I have launched one in British Columbia. Unfortunately, it takes 9 to 12 months to even hear back from the BC Human Rights Tribunal. They are so underfunded and understaffed, so we haven't even heard back from them yet. It's almost been a year, but we'll get there, I guess, right? You've got to be patient, if nothing else. Similarly, the Crime-Free Multi-Housing Program is administered by the RCMP, but also by smaller municipal police forces and governments. So like in Vancouver, it wasn't the police who administered the crime-free multi-housing program, it was the city. So it was the city who did this issue, and they're still using it across all kinds of properties that are funded by the city. Sex workers suggested a collective cooperative housing strategy where they could build a community and build equity together. We also talked about a landlord registry and resource for sex workers to share information about housing opportunities, find roommates, and reporting locations where violent neighbors or landlords and property managers exist. And that would be a good way to start to unravel all of this and protect people's safety. Educational materials about sex workers' right to housing should be created for police, bylaw officers, SCAN unit members, property managers, landlords, and for sex workers. It would be nice if they would undertake the same zeal that they did over the past 30 years to undermine our safety in trying to reclaim that for us and owning what they did. So the coalition have committed to trying to move forward the following actions in response to these recommendations. To work to define and expand the understanding of intersectional consequences of racism and sex work discrimination as it relates to housing. To work to define and expand understanding of Indigenous racism in housing and the importance of centering the experiences of Indigenous and First Nations sex workers. To engage with cooperative housing organizations to better understand the processes for land acquisition, financing, and tiny homes perhaps as a solution. To investigate further the potential of a sex workers' credit union. Now, you might think that sounds crazy, but my heroes in India, the All India Network of Sex Workers, who have 5 million members, have their own bank. So it's not beyond the pale. And interestingly enough, in India, sex workers have more rights than we do in Canada. So we continue to aspire, right? To develop a strategy for creating the Bad Landlord Registry and a sex worker community housing information sharing space. To create a sex worker community developed educational program and materials. To build community networks and support for sustained education and communications campaign. To build opportunities for all stakeholders to gather and discuss solutions to these issues collectively. To engage mainstream systems to remove the SCAN Acts, Community Safety Acts, and any other legislation impacting sex workers' access to stable housing. To engage mainstream systems to work to end the crime-free multi-housing program, and to continue to work to eliminate stigma and discrimination against our community. So thank you for taking the time to learn about sex workers' experiences with housing discrimination. It should be noted that since completion of this report, the BC Coalition have filed 8 human rights complaints with the Canadian Human Rights Commission. They are related to health exclusion, financial exclusion, justice exclusion, and housing exclusion. We have achieved one settlement in those cases against Health Canada. This means we've established that sex workers are human rights holders in Canada. So, as our work progresses, it is our intention to support individual sex workers in bringing human rights complaints when they experience discrimination. While systemic cases do not have a monetary or financial remedy, individual cases do. This should give pause to any housing provider continuing to employ the use of these good neighbor agreements or discriminating against sex workers by excluding us from housing based on our legal source of income. Sex workers' rights are housing rights, and it's time to end housing exclusion of sex workers in Canada. Thank you. There we go. I think that's it.
Perfect. And we do have some time to take a couple of questions. There's just a mic over there, so if you have a question, feel free to line up. Otherwise, you can always raise your hand, and I can bring the mic over. Here.
Hi, my name is Gord. I'm from Toronto, from Neighbours Community Homes. I just want to thank both of you, and Susan, you've really proven your case, and you've really given us food for thought and comprehensively shown us the barriers and the systemic discrimination against sex workers. But my question really is for the first presenter. In terms of I mean, I worked at the hospital in Toronto. It was a mental health team I work with. And those psychiatrists came from Egypt. And she was with us for about 6 months. She was the best psychiatrist we ever had. But she was forced to choose a place in Northern Ontario to go and work because she said that that was a requirement for her to stay in Canada and practice as a psychiatrist. So she had a husband and a child that stayed in Toronto, and she had to drive from North Bay. She chose North Bay every weekend, able to see her husband and child. So I'm wondering, when I learned about this, I didn't know that this was in the law, previously immigration law. And I'm wondering, maybe comment, are there certain segments of immigration law that are particularly repressive and that the Canadian public is really not aware of? Because, we don't often hear, the stories from people that are facing such inhumane type treatment and having to force to live somewhere else, stuff like that. So is there parts of the immigration law which are particularly exclusionary for people, newcomers? That's a question. Right?
Just one minute. Okay. So I would say that's more specific to the Quebec context. Like Quebec has this, I think 2-3 years they created this policy, this new bill that restricts this access to first 6-month period where, you have to learn in order to be able to, get services or get job or anything else. It's a 6-month period. I don't know about the rest of Toronto or that side of area context.
That's always an issue, isn't it? Yeah. With between the federal and the provincial legislation, things get really muddy. And even municipal bylaws and things can get in the mix and really create problems, especially, as you pointed out, with people whose English skills or French skills aren't the best, trying to sort it all out, right? It's.
The last time I was in Montreal, I'm sorry to call the variety store. I don't know here. The variety store owner told us that he came from India. He was an engineer in India, but he couldn't practice as an engineer because he was English speaking and had to learn French and pass the French language exam. He was practicing in the profession. So he was forced to own the variety store. Work at something that you have to work at just to make a living.
Yeah. I'm trying to learn French, and it does not happen in 6-month period. Like, yeah. And, a lot of, there's someone I know that who has been, living here for several years, who have been, working to, this whole process of working to pay rent at a restaurant. They were used to be, a cook. But after this, the linguistic policy that came into effect, they were, demoted back to either a dishwasher or, to get another job kind of situation because they cannot do it anymore.
Hi. I'm just curious if with the SCAN Acts and the provincial complaints, have any other provinces or territories filed complaints yet? And if you know that, like where is the process at with other provinces or territories?
Yes, there was one in the Yukon, and they deemed the SCAN Act unconstitutional. So they won that case up there. It was based on an Indigenous family where the mother was selling pot, I'm assuming, to survive, right? And she had 9 kids, and in the end, the argument was they can't throw everybody out and that the children hadn't violated the tenancy agreement. And so this whole thing just made it unconstitutional, and so it's been taken down in the Yukon. Of course, in British Columbia, we met with the Attorney General to discuss this and a number of other issues, and she said, well, the Community Safety Act is not in force. So it's not in force, they say, but it's still on the books, and it's still being used in practice, and the crime-free multi-housing program is still in play, right? So landlords think that these laws still stand. I mean, I've had landlords try to get sexual favors from me because they would report me, things like that. Obviously, I'm kind of a tough broad and I'm not taking any guff, but for other people, it's not that simple, and they would just comply. And I just think that's really terrible, right? So I know that in Quebec, it was a little bit more difficult to find. It was the Municipalities Act, and the hallmark of the law, of this legal stuff, is specified use. So in Quebec, if you are using it for a specified use, then the municipality can ban you from the property based on that specified use. And that definition includes prostitution. So, yeah, it needs a lot of work. And the good neighbor agreements, I mean, I've heard sessions where new housing developments trying to deal with NIMBYism for shelters and things like that have entered into good neighbor agreements with the surrounding community. This has become this widely used tool, which really, I mean, sure, I get it. You have to negotiate a little bit with the neighbors to make sure that they're comfortable with putting a shelter in their community, but do we? Do we really have to do that? I mean, as soon as there's one little bit of noise, one little thing or the other, then it could be that your entire lease, everything is out the window. So it just seems all very dangerous to me, especially since it's being perpetuated in the ways that I saw at the conference here, So, yeah, a long way to go.
Thank you so much.
I was just wondering if one of the complaints that you filed might have been against, or if you've started one against the City of Vancouver for their discrimination?
No.
Okay.
So at the Canadian Human Rights Commission, those complaints are all on federal agencies. With if it was the City of Vancouver, I would have to go to the BC Human Rights Tribunal. So these ones, the RCMP for crime-free multi-housing, because they're doing it all over the country, as well as their failure to develop specialized tools that would allow access to justice for sex workers. As an example, I was trying to help somebody file a complaint of sexual assault, explaining, is there somebody over there at the detachment that we could call directly, that they could meet with so they could kind of make it more comfortable for a sex worker to report violence? Oh no, sex work's decriminalized. Just come into the front desk and report. You'll go into the front desk of the RCMP detachment. Hi, sex worker, I was just raped. Can I make a report? That's not access to justice. So those are the two complaints against the RCMP and the crime-free multi-housing in this case.
And when you go to launch one of these complaints, do you need to have a lot of financial backing? Like, are you able to do it because of your organization, or is it something that anyone can do?
Lawyers.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
We don't need no stinking lawyers. I can read, and I've been doing this for so long. So I wrote a letter to the Human Rights Commission. I phoned them on the day after the Ontario Superior Court threw out the case that the Canadian Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform brought. And the poor young guy on the phone, he was very, very nice to me, in spite of what I was saying, but I was freaking out and I was mad and saying all of the things I had discovered from the population project. I said, doesn't that mean this is a human rights violation? This is a denial of service, right? And they're like, yes, let me speak to my manager. It came back, yes, you are right. So then they granted me a meeting where I went down the grocery list of all the ways in which human rights for the denial of service to sex workers in Canada. And they settled on 8 of the things that I brought up. So it's sort of misleading. It's 1 against Health Canada, 2 against the RCMP for justice and the crime-free multi-housing, and then FinTrack for financial exclusion. But then I also had 4 banks. 4 of the major banks are included in that complaint. So that makes 8, but it's really only 4, right? If you know what I mean, 4 cases. So I filed all of those complaints. I guess it's been 2 years now. I've been through conciliation. It's brutal. What a horrible space to work in. Oh my God, the language in that sphere is terrible. Sex workers don't qualify for human rights. This is frivolous and vexatious. This is a waste of your valuable resources. Sex workers aren't worth this. they called me money hungry. They called me a liar. It was unbelievable. It's not something I would recommend to a lot of people. But I'm tough, right? So I can take it. I've heard it all before. And anyway, we managed to get through. The RCMP tried to, for example, take the case out of the commission into their own complaints process, which they said was a similar process with a similar outcome. No, because their complaints process makes recommendations, where the Canadian Human Rights Commission's decisions, their tribunal's decision, is binding. They have to do what they say. So I managed to win that argument, and we are continuing at the commission. We are supposed to be in conciliation. They keep delaying, and I'm sure that they think that they're running up my legal bills. Meanwhile, I'm just doing it from the basement of my little butcher shop, in between clients, just. And that's how we get a lot of things done, like the lowest level of enforcement policy for sex work in Vancouver, which has now been adopted across the entire province by all 45 police services and the division of the RCMP. I went to the police board 40 times as a delegation. Just keep going. I had nothing else to do, right? What the hell? I'll go down there. And just kept sort of updating. And you can't say the same thing twice within 6 months as a delegation, so you have to be careful how you strategically plan what you're going to say and change it just enough. But in the end, they struck a little committee that came up with a number of great ideas, a community policing partnership car for sex workers to attend when an enforcement action was necessary, the sex work liaison position, all those kinds of things. So yeah, if you just keep throwing mud at the walls until something sticks is the way that Hetty Fry said to me, Dr. Hetty Fry. So
Well, thank you so much for all your work.
thank you.
Does anyone else have a question? All right. On that note, then, would you all join me in just giving another round of applause to our presenters?
Thank you, Montreal.
Thank you all for joining this session. I hope you have a lovely evening.